Welcome back. I am John P. Today, we are going to be talking about 5 things that, as a watch collector, you absolutely must do with your watches. Now, of course, you're free to do anything you'd like. I'm only sharing with you these tips and tricks based on not only my experience as a longtime watch collector, at least proportionate to my age, but also the fact that I do have DelReyWatch.com with my business partner Federico from Federico Talks Watches, where we buy, sell, and trade high-end and luxury watches and enthusiast-grade watches. Feel free to check that out, by the way, DelReyWatch.com. But because of this, and of course this YouTube channel, I speak with so many of you, and not only do I have the insight to my personal experiences with watches, but also just hundreds and hundreds of people and stories that I've heard and have been shared with me about different things that have happened. So these 5 things that I'm going to be sharing with you are just things that you really should do to protect yourself when owning these luxury items, these watches that are truly convertible to cash, at least in today's luxury goods market. So I'm going to share that with you in just 1 second. But on the wrist today, I'm sure many of you are wondering, yes, the Rolex Oyster Perpetual 39 red grape or the purple dial. I love this watch, and I'm kind of, let me give you a little bit of foreshadowing. There's going to be a video that I'm going to be releasing here in the next couple of weeks where I talk about why I think this may be the perfect watch, at least for me. So make sure to stay tuned for that. DelReyWatch.com, buy, sell, trade watches, as well as SinclairStraps.com for the best premium watch straps, and Instagram, The Real John P. So the first thing you absolutely need to do, or you should do, is you should insure your watches. Now, many of you may be thinking, well, I don't put myself into any harm's way, or I don't take the risk, or I live in a nice neighborhood, things like that. Yes, I get that. And those things go a long way in terms of protecting yourself to a certain extent. But the reality is things do happen. That's why there's auto insurance, homeowners insurance, dental insurance, life insurance, right? Because oftentimes you just don't know what could happen, right? And so for literally almost nothing compared to the price that you'd be paying for your watches, you can insure your watches typically on your homeowner's insurance policy or your renter's insurance. I mean, it may raise your premium by a handful of dollars per month. And when we're talking about usually a pretty quick process with some of these companies, you'll have to check your individual companies. It's almost a no-brainer, right? You go online, it takes a few minutes, you fill out a form, you tell them what you have, and unless it's a very large, sizable collection in terms of monetary value, typically they'll just let you add it on to your policy with a matter of raising your premium by maybe $5, $10, $15, $20 per month. And I think it's just a nice peace of mind sometimes when you're kind of deciding what watches am I going to wear, or maybe how you store them. So I think it's a great advice. And the reality is today I do hear about more watch theft, especially as more people kind of realize the value of these things. So that's the first thing that I recommend every watch collector do. Insure your watches if you can. Now, with that, and something you'll have to do in order to insure the watches, and something you should do to protect yourself, is you should, number 2 here on the list, is you should document the serial numbers of your watches and also take pictures. This is something that takes literally minutes, but not only will you likely need that, depending on the policy for the insurance, but also in the event if something gets lost or stolen, or someone pulls this new scam that's going around where they claim to own the watches that you have that tangible proof that the watches were in your possession at some point in time, and that they are yours to an extent, right? If you can document the pictures, the serial numbers. If something does happen, like the watches go missing, or if someone takes it, says it's theirs, who knows, you name it, a whole number of scenarios could happen to you and your watches in life. You have the evidence that, no, this was mine. I went out of my way to document that these watches belong to me. Now, with that, when you take the photos, on the flip side, something you should not do, and this will be in a future video, I'll elaborate more on this, but you should not share your serial numbers on the internet. You should not share pictures that show the serial numbers on the internet. If you notice at Del Rey Watch, we blur out the serial numbers, and that is to protect ultimately the buyer of the watch and also the other owners of the watch, because one particular type of fraud that goes around on the internet today is people will claim that the watch is theirs, and they will look at your photo. They'll create this very crafty scenario. I'll share one particular person that said, a certain Breitling watch was taken out of their book bag at some airport, this and that, but they never really had any evidence that the watch was theirs. And also, we knew very well who the watch came from, and they were the original owner. They purchased it. They had the receipt, so we could actually contact the original owner of the watch and determine this other person that's reaching out about this particular watch. This was years and years ago, before this scam started going around, but we could actually determine because we knew the original owner. So absolutely need to protect yourself in that way. Document the serial numbers, take a picture, and do not share that with anyone. Now, going with that train of thought, always retain some proof of purchase of the watch. If it's private party between buyers, document the transaction. If you buy a watch from someone like us, Del Rey Watch, or any other pre-owned dealer or gray market dealer, keep the email that shows where you bought the watch. If you bought the watch new from the authorized dealer, keep the receipt, right? This is something that is very simple to do, but in that unlikely but possible event where something happens in life involving that watch, something that has real world value, right? You're protecting yourself to an additional extent. And there's so many times where, this does come up, right? People will, for example, say they bought a watch one place and they didn't, or they'll maybe say that they bought a watch at an authorized dealer because it sounds better. And, some people just kind of get into that kind of mindset of making something seem better than it is for whatever reason, but that's something we've seen happen. But they don't have the receipt, right? And so if you keep the receipts, should you go to sell it, it makes the buyer feel a little bit more safe about that because they know where you got the watch from. So they know that adds that extra level of credibility. So if you do have the receipt, that's a great thing. Keep track of the documentation, the paperwork, set it in a drawer. It does really go a long way in the event that something happens, especially let's say, you do have to make a claim against your insurance, or you're shipping the watch, or a whole number of things. You leave it in your bag at the airport, it goes through TSA, and then it goes missing. Well, did you have evidence of it? So keep that as well. Trust me, in this scenario that you need it, it will go a long way. Now, for the storage of watches, number 4 on this list, I always recommend to store your watches in either a safe or a safety deposit box. Now, of course, at Del Rey Watch, we have a vault, all the security, top to bottom, and so do, basically every watch dealer and watch reseller, authorized dealers. We all have that. That's a different level of security, much beyond what someone who's collecting, unless they have an unbelievable collection, would really need. But a simple safe in your home someplace, whether it's a in-the-wall kind of covert safe or a jewelry safe or something that people couldn't carry off, just adds that extra peace of mind. But also, if you do start collecting a sizable collection and people know about it, sometimes people can be the target, right? Or sometimes it's just in the back of your head knowing you have that kind of thing laying around the house, especially if you travel, you go out of town, or you name it, perhaps you have parties. Everyone is in different life scenarios, but keeping the watches in a bank safety deposit box adds that additional security. And in addition, if your collection does get sizable enough that warrants something like that, the insurance company that's insuring your collection is really going to like to see that, because they see that you're taking the extra mile. It's in a very safe place that has the added security that meets a lot of the requirements that they start imposing on the way that you store your watches at a certain value. So safety deposit box or a safe, I recommend it. I know some people are more than comfortable leaving the watches in a sock drawer or something like that. And hey, everyone is certainly up to make their own decisions. But I always recommend to someone when they want the recommendation, safety deposit box is the way, or even perhaps a home safe. Now, lastly, this is one that I also am faulted on for sometimes not following. This is something just because of the amount of watches that I've had over the years, and just the amount of time that it takes to do this, and the amount of necessary attention it takes to do this. And of course, I treat my personal collection different than our standard operating procedures at Delray Watch, but I always recommend maintaining your watch properly. Now, some brands will advocate to, service your watch something like every 5 years, which I don't think is necessary, right? But I do think you should service your watch, especially if you start seeing some telltale signs. And I've had Hans, our watchmaker, on the channel in the past that talks about some of these telltale signs of when to service your watch. But, throw a number out there, let's say 7-8 years on average. Have your watch looked at by a watchmaker. The cost of routine maintenance and service on basic time or time date watches with ETA or something, a movement off the shelf is minimal compared to the hassle or the headache that the watch and the experience of owning that watch may actually bring to you if there are serious problems that arise from not maintaining the watch. So get a quick service or an overhaul every 7-8 years maybe. Depends on the watch, depends on so many things, but on average for all the watches out there, probably 7 or 8 years, and you're really gonna save yourself so many headaches into the future, and the cost is much lower if you do the maintenance on the watch than if there's an issue breaking the parts because things are not lubricated properly, the gears start breaking, wearing down, and then pieces of metal get in there. And the watchmakers, they're in such high demand today that when you start getting into making parts and finding parts, and people have to find those parts for you and take that extra troubleshooting process instead of a standard overhaul, that's when things kind of start getting expensive and almost make it sometimes not worth the hassle for watch collectors, I've noticed. So do that. And as a bonus, I want to share, because I'm seeing this a whole lot today with kind of the rise in popularity of not only the Submariner, but other sports watch, dive watches, watches with screw down crowns. I do see a lot of people not screwing down the crown totally, which of course hurts the water resistance rating on the watch and increases the likelihood that water is going to get into the watch, damage the watch, ruin the dial, and get into a very costly repair. I've seen this with different watches so many times with our service center at Delray Watch, where there's just water damage. And sometimes people say the crown was screwed down, maybe it wasn't, but this is something that even I do with the watches that I wear. Periodically, I check just to make sure that the crown is screwed down. It's something that I've kind of just gotten in the habit of, and I think it's something that I haven't seen a lot of people really do besides myself. Now, maybe I'm more of a creature of habit, but I think a very simple thing, just check the crown, make sure it's screwed down, and you'll save yourself, once again, a very large repair service bill, or maybe even the ability to obtain something like a dial or an original dial for certain types of watches, depending on what it is. But what do you think out there about these tips? How do you handle your watches? How do you store them? I would love to see it and hear it in the comments below. Are there any other things that you would recommend to your fellow watch collectors that they must do with their watches? Please leave that in the comments below. Guys, please do not forget to thumbs up, like, and subscribe. I really do appreciate it. You can check out DelrayWatch.com, SinclairStraps.com, and my Instagram, TheRealJohnP. Thanks, guys. You've been chatting with John P.